the 17th of February 2022.
Weeks before he was due to answer questions under oath.
Prince Andrew has settled his sex abuse lawsuit with Virginia Giuffre.
From news.com.au.
I'm Andrew Bucklow, and I've got news for you. Well, it feels like the royal family have been lurching from one crisis to another in the last few years, and yesterday their reputation was dealt yet another blow when it was announced that Prince Andrew had settled a sexual assault lawsuit. In today's episode, we'll take a look at the events leading up to the historic settlement. We'll find out how much he's allegedly agreed to pay his accuser and where he plans to get the money from. Plus, we'll take a look back at the 7 biggest PR crises the royal family has ever faced, including an explicit phone call between Prince Charles and Camilla. Honestly, it's disgusting. Virginia Giuffre claims that in 2001, when she was just 17 years old, she was instructed by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell to have sex with their associate, Prince Andrew. She claims they had sex on 3 different occasions, at Ghislaine Maxwell's home in London, at Jeffrey Epstein's house in New York, and on the financier's private island in the Virgin Islands. Her claims were first mentioned in court filings in 2015, which prompted Buckingham Palace to issue 2 statements denying Andrew had any sexual contact with Miss Giuffre. Fast forward to 2019, and Jeffrey Epstein was arrested and charged with sex trafficking, but he never made it to trial.
Some breaking news right now. Disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein has taken his own life while he was behind bars here in New York City. Epstein was facing sex trafficking charges.
The Epstein saga sparked fresh questions about Prince Andrew's involvement with Miss Giuffre, and the royal decided to discuss the claims in a tell-all interview with the BBC.
I can absolutely categorically tell you it never happened.
Do you recall any kind of sexual contact with Virginia Roberts then
none,
or any other time?
None whatsoever.
Not long afterwards, Miss Giuffre was interviewed by the BBC and spoke in detail about the alleged assaults, including the first time in London.
Well, there was a bath and it started there and then it led into the bedroom and it didn't last very long, the whole entire procedure. It was disgusting. He wasn't mean or anything, but he got up and he said thanks and walked out. And
in August last year, Miss Giuffre filed a civil suit against Prince Andrew in New York alleging sexual abuse. Andrew's lawyers tried and failed to get the lawsuit dismissed, and yesterday they dropped a bombshell.
We begin this hour with that breaking news, a court filing out of Manhattan revealing just moments ago that Queen Elizabeth's younger son, Prince Andrew, is settling a sexual assault lawsuit. It was brought against him by one of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein.
Joining me now is news.com.au's royal writer, Daniela Elsa. Daniela, the big question, do we know how much Prince Andrew settled for?
We do, and it's a bloody lot. So the UK's Telegraph is reporting that Andrew's going to have to pay Virginia Giuffre about £12 million, which works out about 22.7 million Australian dollars, which is a huge sum, obviously. Now, that has not been officially confirmed. The palace will never confirm it, but given it's coming from a really credible source, I think we can take that as, you know, the right number or very close to it.
And does all of that money go to Virginia Giuffre?
No, it doesn't. So look, obviously some would go to her lawyers, but part of the settlement is that Andrew has said he's going to make a donation to the charity that Virginia runs. So if you go back to 2015, she started a foundation which was called Victims Refuse Silence. That got renamed last year to Speak Out, Act, Reclaim, or SOAR, and it was relaunched late last year. So some of that money will be going to that organisation too.
I guess the other big question is, where does all this money come from that Andrew is going to pay for the settlement?
Now, look, I think that's the most fascinating question because, you know, he basically has no money. And so the short answer is probably the Queen. It's been widely reported, you know, before now that she was footing the bill for, you know, his lawyers. He had lawyers in the UK and the US. So she's been paying for that. And sort of most likely he will have had to have turned to the Bank of Mum here to get her to sort of help him, you know, pay it out. Now, again, the Telegraph is reporting that the money will be specifically coming from something called the Duchy of Lancaster, which is a private estate that whoever is king or queen gets to control. You know, and last year the Queen made $42 million from the Duchy of Lancaster, so she has the money, but still it's probably coming from her and not from Andrew himself.
So the Queen technically might have to pay money to settle a court case with a woman who accused her son of sexual assault. I mean, that's not a good look, is it?
It's just abysmal, and it's hard to sort of even imagine a situation which would be more of a PR disaster. We know she's kind of doled out money in the past to help her kids out of tricky situations. When Charles divorced Diana, she had to lend him a good chunk of the $32 million that he paid out to her. But, that's a completely different situation. And as you said, we have a son of the monarch who's been accused of sexual assault, something, of course, that he has always denied, but still, has been accused of, and that he's now had to settle this case before it goes to trial later in the year. It's just a horrible situation from a public relations perspective for the monarchy.
Now, this settlement will no doubt raise questions about the Queen's financial situation. Do we have any idea how much she's worth?
Look, lots of people have had a crack at this question, at trying to work out exactly how much money she has, and really no one knows, because it's completely and utterly guarded by a number of particular sort of trusts and various other things. So, there've been various estimates. There's a guy named David McClure who wrote probably one of the best books on this, called The Queen's True Worth. He reckons she's worth more than $750 million. Wow. Now, that's her personal worth, mind. What she sort of has as a person. It doesn't include things like the Crown Jewels or Buckingham Palace or those sorts of things. So, the short answer is really bloody wealthy.
What now for Prince Andrew? What does the rest of his life look like?
Well, I think the rest of Andrew's life looks pretty sad, really. There's been plenty of speculation that he's going to want to try and claw his way back, that will want some sort of public role. But I would personally, argue that seems really unlikely, because, what charity or organisation is going to want anything to do with him? He's just so toxic. I don't see how he has any sort of public role again. But he still is going to get to enjoy all the trappings of royal life. He's still going to get to keep living in Royal Lodge, which is the huge 31-room mansion he lives in Windsor. We know he pays what's called a peppercorn rent. It's believed to be about less than $500 a week for this sort of astronomically huge historic property. It's so big it has its own chapel. So, he's sort of, in some ways, he's going to get all the perks of royalty without having to do any of the work for them, to earn them. So that's his life. He's stuck at home with Fergie from now on.
Oh, that is punishment enough. Who I also feel for, apart from the victim, Virginia Giuffre, and any other victims, you've got to feel for Prince Andrew's daughters, don't you? Yeah,
look, Princess Eugenie and Princess Beatrice are pretty great, really. They've never really, aside from Princess Beatrice's pretty hideous hat going back to the royal wedding, they haven't ever really put a foot wrong. They just seem like two kind of quite nice girls who are sort of getting on with their life. They've tried to do sort of good things. Princess Eugenie has a charity which is called the Anti-Slavery Collective that has gone very quiet in the last couple of years, and you can understand why. It must be really hard for them to sort of have, both of their parents' behaviour reflecting on them.
Joining me now is news.com.au's Bronte Coy to run us through the 7 biggest PR crises the royal family has ever suffered. Bronte, let's start at number 7 and count our way down.
Oh, we're going to kick it off with our favourite redhead. You know who I'm talking about, Prince Harry. Now, Bucky, you might recall back in 2005, he was photographed at a costume party, and what was he wearing? A Nazi outfit.
Oh, yeah.
So as you can imagine, that was quite a PR crisis. Harry apologised, and Buckingham Palace did release a statement saying that the Prince realised it was a poor choice of costume, but really the damage had been done, hadn't it?
A poor choice of costume, you think? What an understatement that is. Can I just put on the record as well, I bloody hate costume parties, so if anyone's listening, don't invite me to one. I don't want to come. What's number 6, Bronte?
Well, we're on a roll with Prince Harry. Let's just stick around talking about him. There's plenty of content there. So let's talk about when he was caught in his birthday suit. You remember that?
Well, it wasn't a Nazi suit, I guess. That's something.
Oh, God, the bar was low. You might recall he was photographed partying naked in a hotel room in Las Vegas in 2007. I think it's actually your background on your phone still. Some revealing photos were leaked, but thankfully, Bucky, Harry was covering his crown jewels.
Oh, thankfully. What do you mean? I've always wondered if he has a decent pool cue. Anyway, let's move on to number 5.
If you were hoping it would get less smutty from here on out, you're wrong. Next up is what most people like to call Camilla Gate, although some do like to call it, and here's a gross warning, Tampon Gate.
Oh, God, this doesn't sound promising. All right, hit me.
It's honestly not. So 3 months after Prince Charles and Diana formally separated, a full transcript of a sexy, and I'm using that term loosely, telephone call between Charles and Camilla from 1989 was printed in the newspaper. It was pretty full on. Charles, I can barely say this, Charles said he'd like to live in Camilla's knickers, and he said he wished he could be a tampon in her.
Oh, wow. I mean, straight people, you really are the absolute worst. Now, let's just move on from that very quickly before I get a mental image of what's going on with Camilla downstairs. Anyway, number 4.
In 1995, Diana did an interview about the breakdown of her marriage with Prince Charles. Now, this was a bombshell interview. In fact, it's been called the most controversial interview in royal history. She let rip at the royal family and said she was aware Charles had had a long-running affair with Camilla. Have a listen.
Do you think Mrs. Parker Bowles was a factor in the breakdown of your marriage?
Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
Yeah, take that, Camilla. God, I love Diana. All right, Bronte, hit me with number 3 of the royal family's biggest PR crises.
Well, this one goes back nearly 100 years, all the way back to the 1930s. The monarch was King Edward at the time, but there was a constitutional crisis and PR crisis when he fell in love with an American woman named Wallis Simpson. So basically, the king wasn't allowed to marry a divorced woman, and spoiler, Wallis was divorced. So instead of giving up his love, he gave up the crown and abdicated and made his brother king, which, by the way, is what led to Queen Elizabeth. So there you go.
Oh, there you go. Love over money. Wrong choice, I say. What's number 2?
That explains so much about you. So all of Prince Andrew is basically a PR crisis at this point. I think that's fair. A couple of years ago, after being accused of sexual assault by Virginia Giuffre, Andrew did a TV interview where he disputed some of the accusations. The whole thing was a train wreck, but the standout moment was his excuse as to why her claim that he was a sweaty mess when they allegedly hooked up simply could not be true.
I have a peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat, or I didn't sweat at the time.
Ah, yes, the classic I don't sweat excuse. Good one, Andrew. All right, Bronte, the big one. Drum roll, please. What is number 1 of the biggest PR crises of the royal family?
You didn't think we could go past Harry and Meghan's recent PR crises, did you? Well, it's hard to go past this one in particular. So Meghan Markle, early last year, outed one of the royal family members as a racist, an alleged racist. In the bombshell interview she and Harry did with Oprah Winfrey, they claimed that one of the royal family members had some concerns about their son Archie.
Concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born.
What?
And
who is having that conversation?
Oh, I remember that moment. I mean, we still don't know which royal it was, but God, I would love to know.
Me too. Should we have a guess?
No, I don't think we should. We might end up getting sued. Thanks for those updates there, Bronte.
Thanks, Bucky.
We'll keep you up to date on any developments in this Prince Andrew story on news.com.au. In the meantime, thanks for listening to I've Got News For You, and I'll chat to you again tomorrow.